The first thing Max noticed was how the rope smelled. Like gasoline and old sweat, rough fibers scratching against his still soft puppy fur. He whimpered as the knot tightened around his neck, his paws slipping on damp autumn leaves. The man's hands that had petted him just hours ago now shoved him roughly against the gnarled oak tree. "Stay," the man grunted, giving the rope one final vicious tug that made Max's eyes water. The puppy tilted his head in confusion, his floppy ears twitching. This wasn't the warm stay that came with treats and head scratches. This stay tasted metallic with fear. The car door slammed with a sound like thunder. Max's entire body jerked toward the noise, his claws digging into the soft earth. Through the dusty windshield he saw the man's face. Not angry, not sad, just empty. As the engine roared to life, Max's bark tore from his throat, high-pitched and desperate. "Wait! I know sit! Watch! Sit! See? Sit!" exclamation mark. His hindquarters plopped down obediently even as the car began moving. "I can learn more! I'll be quiet! Gravel spat against his face as the tires spun. Max strained against the rope, his puppy muscles burning, until the fibers bit so deep he choked. The taillights disappeared over the hill, taking with them the last warmth Max would know for days. The first hour passed in confused whimpers. Max alternated between chewing at the rope, only succeeding in making his gums bleed, and scratching at the tree bark, until his claws split. By midday, the summer sun turned his black nose leather painfully hot. His pink tongue lolled out, dripping saliva that attracted buzzing flies but no help. When shadows grew long, the real terror began. The oak's branches creaked like old bones in the wind, casting shapes that made Max's hackles rise. A distant howl sent him scrambling in a circle, the rope burning his neck raw. He emptied his bladder in fear, the acrid smell mixing with the earthy scent of coming rain. That first night was endless. Every rustle in the bushes became a predator. Every owl's hoot made his tail tuck tighter between his legs. When thunder rumbled, Max threw back his head and howled, a sound so mournful it silenced the crickets. No one answered. By dawn, his cries had turned to hoarse whispers. His belly ached with hunger, his water bowl long since kicked over by some careless boot. He lapped at a muddy puddle, gagging on the grit. The rope had worn a bald patch around his neck, the skin beneath oozing and hot to the touch. On the second morning, the crows came. They perched just out of reach, beady eyes assessing his weakness. One bold bird pecked at his spilled food bowl, its wings flapping mockingly close. Max lacked the energy to even growl. His once glossy golden fur was matted with dirt and burrs, his ribs beginning to show beneath his skin. The summer storm hit on day 3. Rain fell in icy sheets, turning the ground to slick mud. Max shivered violently, his body temperature plummeting. He curled into the tightest ball possible beneath the tree, his whimpers lost in the thunder. In that moment he understood with terrible clarity. He was going to die here. Forgotten. Unloved. A good dog who waited too long for someone who wasn't coming back. But then, a miracle. Through the downpour, a new scent. Not rain, not dirt. Something sweet like strawberry shampoo and pencil shavings. Max's nose twitched. His head lifted with the last of his strength as small, rain-boot-clad feet splashed into view. A child's gasp. Then warmth, glorious, life-giving warmth, as tiny hands cupped his face. Max's tail gave one feeble thump against the mud. He didn't know if this small human was real or some dying dream, but when those fingers touched his rope-burned neck, he licked them weakly. The taste of salt. Tears? His or hers? Scissors flashed. The rope fell away. And as Max collapsed into those small, shaking arms, he heard the words that would rewrite his destiny. "I've got you now. You're safe." The firefly that had flickered near his nose all those lonely nights, It landed on the discarded rope just once before winking out, its watch finally over. The metal bowl clanged against Lena's sneaker with a sound that echoed through the empty field. She knelt down, her braids swinging forward as she righted the rusted dish. Stagnant water sloshed over her fingers, carrying the sour smell of neglect. Something about the way it had been kicked aside, not dropped, not placed, but kicked, made her stomach clench like she'd swallowed a rock. Then she heard it. A sound so small it might have been the wind whistling through the oak's branches. But Lena's ears, tuned to the secret frequencies of childhood, caught the difference. This wasn't weather. This was pain. Her breath hitched as she pushed through the tall grass, each step revealing more horrors. Drag marks in the dirt, tufts of golden fur caught on brambles, and finally, the rope. It wasn't tied carelessly. Someone had wound it methodically around the tree's thickest root, the fibers frayed from days, weeks, of desperate pulling. "Hello?" Lena whispered, her voice cracking on the second syllable. The grass trembled. Then, with agonizing slowness, two eyes emerged from the shadows beneath the oak. They weren't dog eyes. Not really. These were ancient eyes, the kind that belonged in storybooks about shipwrecked sailors and abandoned ghosts. The whites were bloodshot, the pupils dilated with pain. But what made Lena's heart stop was the way they looked at her. Not with hope, but with resignation. Like he'd seen humans approach before, only to turn away. The puppy's body was one big wound. Flies formed a living crown around his neck, where the rope had worn through fur and skin. His ribs pressed against his coat like piano keys, each breath rattling. When he tried to wag his tail, it moved barely an inch before falling limp against the leaves. Lena's backpack hit the ground with a thud. Her hands moved without conscious thought, digging past math homework and juice boxes until her fingers closed around the safety scissors from art class. The plastic handles felt absurdly small in her grip, like bringing a spoon to a sword fight. The moment the cold metal touched his neck, the puppy convulsed. A warm wetness spread across Lena's knees as he lost control of his bladder, his whole body shaking with remembered pain. The smell of urine mixed with something worse, the sickly sweet odor of infection. I'm sorry," Lena chanted, tears plopping onto his head like rain. Her first cut barely nicked the rope. The scissors were meant for construction paper, not woven fibers. She adjusted her grip, her palms sweating, and sawed with all her 9-year-old strength. A strand snapped, then another. With each tiny victory, the puppy's breathing changed, shallow pants giving way to something like disbelief. When the final fibers parted, the sound was louder than Lena expected, like a chain breaking. What happened next would stay etched in Lena's memory forever. 42 pounds of living, breathing gratitude collapsed into her arms. Not attacking, not escaping, surrendering. The puppy's nose pressed against her collarbone as if checking her heartbeat, his entire body trembling with the effort to stay conscious. Up close, Lena could see the individual lashes framing his eyes, the way his tongue was cracked from dehydration, the single white whisker amid the gold. Then he licked her chin. It wasn't a playful lick. It was sacramental, a vow. The salt from Lena's tears seemed to revive him, his tail managing 2 weak thumps against her leg. When she shifted to stand, his claws dug into her shirt with sudden panic. "Shh," Lena soothed, hiking him up like a baby. His back legs dangled awkwardly, too weak to grip. "I've got you." The walk home passed in a blur. The puppy's breath warmed her neck, each exhale a whispered prayer. Lena's arms burned from the weight, but she refused to adjust her grip, terrified he might think she was putting him down for good. Halfway across the field, she felt something change, his muscles relaxing, his head growing heavier against her shoulder. He'd fallen asleep, not passed out. Slept. For the first time in days, He felt safe enough to close those haunted eyes. As they passed the discarded bowl, Lena made another promise, silent this time. She'd bring him a new one, shiny, with his name on it. Maybe Max, short for Maximum Good Boy. The thought made her hug him tighter, her tears drying in the summer sun. Behind them, the abandoned rope swayed gently in the breeze, its purpose finally served. And if you'd been standing very close in that moment, you might have heard it. The softest sigh of relief, as the oak tree finally released its captive. The scent of crayons and fear mingled in the darkness of Lena's closet, a peculiar combination that would forever define this moment in Max's memory. The space was barely large enough for a child's winter coats, let alone a rapidly growing German Shepherd puppy. Yet somehow they made it work. Max's body formed a trembling comma between a threadbare teddy bear named Mr. Snuffles and a shoebox-turned makeshift bed, its sides reinforced with duct tape and childhood determination. Lena's flashlight beam trembled as she examined Max's wounds up close for the first time. The rope burns around his neck formed an angry crimson collar, the skin beneath weeping a clear fluid that glistened in the artificial light. His paws, still soft-padded from puppyhood, were cracked and bleeding from days of desperate scratching at the tree roots. Worst of all was the way he flinched when she touched his ribs. Not from pain, but from the shock of gentle hands after so much cruelty. "You're okay," Lena whispered, pressing her forehead to his. The words tasted like a lie. Up close, she could see the individual flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the way his pupils dilated with each creak of the house settling. His entire body vibrated with tension, muscles coiled to bolt despite having nowhere to go. The raincoat she'd smuggled him in lay in a damp heap nearby, its sleeves still twisted from when she'd carried him up the stairs, his weight making her arms tremble with effort. The shoebox bed crinkled as Max shifted, his claws catching on the cotton balls Lena had glued to the bottom as padding. She watched his nostrils flare at the scent of her old baby blanket lining the box. Did he recognize it as something meant for cherished things? His tail gave a single questioning thump against the closet wall that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. "Shh," Lena breathed, using her nightgown sleeve to wipe the sleep sand from his eyes. The motion left a streak of dirt on the pale pink fabric, evidence of their secret. Outside, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, each toll vibrating through the floorboards. Max's ears swiveled like radar dishes, tracking invisible threats. Then, the sound that stopped both their hearts. A floorboard groaned directly outside her bedroom door. Not the usual house-settling noise, but the particular creak of weight being carefully distributed across aged wood. Lena's breath hitched. The flashlight slipped from her fingers, rolling to illuminate Max's face in stark relief. His tongue darting out to lick his dry nose, his eyes wide with understanding. "Lena?" Her father's voice, muffled through the door but unmistakable. "You awake?" Max's whine started as a vibration deep in his chest, rising like a siren. Lena moved faster than she ever had in gym class, clamping a hand over his muzzle. The feel of his warm breath against her palm, the prickle of his whiskers, the way his body went utterly still beneath her touch. These sensations imprinted themselves on her memory with photographic clarity. The doorknob turned with a click that might as well have been a gunshot. In the terrible silence that followed, Lena became aware of several things simultaneously. The sweat cooling on the back of her neck, the cramp forming in her leg from kneeling too long, the way Max's heartbeat thundered against her thigh where their bodies touched. Some distant part of her mind noted that she'd stopped breathing. Then, miracle of miracles, the doorknob clicked back into place. Footsteps retreated down the hallway, accompanied by her father's sleepy mutter about probably just the cat. For 3 full minutes after the sounds faded, neither moved. Then Max exhaled in a rush that stirred the hair hanging in Lena's face. His entire body seemed to melt into the closet floor, the tension draining away to leave behind pure exhaustion. He rested his chin on her knee with a sigh that seemed too heavy for a puppy. Lena's hands shook as she retrieved the flashlight. The beam caught the raw skin beneath Max's collar as he curled into himself, his nose tucked under his tail in a protective loop. Without thinking, she reached for the first aid kit she'd stolen from the bathroom earlier, the one with the cartoon bandages she'd outgrown years ago. The antiseptic stung. Max didn't whimper, but his eyelids fluttered wildly as Lena dabbed at his wounds, her touch feather-light. When she produced a stolen hot dog from her pajama pocket, his reaction was heartbreaking. He sniffed it cautiously first, then took it with a delicacy that suggested he expected it to be snatched away. As he ate, Lena constructed a fortress around their secret. Stuffed animals formed a sound-absorbing wall. A spare pillow became a makeshift door. Her winter coat, unneeded in summer, transformed into a blackout curtain hung over the closet rod. When she finally curled around Max in their makeshift nest, his body heat warding off the central air's chill, she felt something wet touch her cheek. Not her tears this time, but Max's nose, nudging her face with infinite gentleness. Outside, the moon cast silver light across the abandoned rope, still tangled in the oak tree's roots. But here, in this shoebox sanctuary, two heartbeats gradually synchronized in the dark. One rapid with childhood fear, the other slowing as a puppy learned for the first time what it meant to feel safe. The vet's office smelled like antiseptic and false hope. Max's claws clicked nervously against the stainless steel examination table, each tiny sound echoing in the sterile silence. His body trembled so violently the scale's needle danced between numbers, unable to settle. Lena kept one hand buried in the fur between his shoulders, feeling the rapid-fire beat of his heart through her fingertips. The other hand clutched the frayed edge of her t-shirt, twisting the fabric into anxious knots. "Easy now," Dr. Bennett murmured as she ran practiced hands along Max's spine. The vet's fingers paused at each protruding rib, her frown deepening. When she lifted his front paw to examine the cracked pads, Max let out a whine so high-pitched it made the clinic's resident tabby cat arch its back from across the room. "Malnourished, dehydrated. These rope burns are infected," Dr. Bennett announced, her voice carefully neutral as she dabbed at the raw ring around Max's neck with a cotton ball. The antiseptic solution left angry pink streaks in its wake. "He's got hookworms, a slight fever, and what looks like early-stage pneumonia from exposure." The vet's eyes flicked to Lena's father. "Frankly, he's lucky to be alive." Lena's father shifted his weight, the vinyl chair creaking beneath him. His work boots, still dusty from the construction site, left faint prints on the linoleum as he crossed, then uncrossed his ankles. "Look, Doc, we can't afford—" Thump. The sound cut through the clinical air like an axe through ice. Max's tail had connected with the examination table with surprising force for such a weakened animal. Not the frantic wagging of a happy dog, but one deliberate, resonant strike that made the instruments in their sterile trays rattle. All eyes turned to the GermanShepherd puppy. Max wasn't looking at the vet or Lena. His gaze, those impossibly old eyes in that too young face, remained locked on Lena's father. The message in them was as clear as if he'd spoken aloud. "I don't need much, just a chance." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for church sanctuaries and hospital waiting rooms. Even the clinic's humming fluorescent lights seemed to dim in reverence. Lena watched her father's face undergo a subtle transformation. The way his jaw muscles bunched, then relaxed. How his calloused fingers uncurled from their tight fists. But it was her mother who broke the stalemate with a quiet yet undeniable declaration. 1 week trial. The ride home passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Max lay across Lena's lap in the back seat, his nose pressed to the window, watching the world stream by in a confusing rush of colors and shapes. Every so often, his body would tense as they passed a particular type of tree, Oak, always Oak. And Lena would distract him by scratching behind his ears until he melted against her once more. That first night of official residency, Max didn't sleep in the closet. He claimed the foot of Lena's bed with the solemnity of a knight taking his post, curling his still too thin body around her ankles like a living, breathing blanket. Every hour on the hour, like clockwork, Max would jerk awake in a panic, his legs churning against the bedsheets as if running from invisible pursuers. Each time, without fail, Lena's small hand would find his ear in the darkness, her sleepy murmurs guiding him back from whatever nightmare had him in its teeth. "Just a dream," she'd whisper, her thumb stroking the velvety fur inside his ear. "You're safe now." By the third night, the nightmares came less frequently. By the fifth, Max discovered the joy of stealing pillows. Lena awoke to find him sprawled triumphantly across her favorite unicorn pillowcase, his legs twitching as he chased dream squirrels. The sight made her chest ache with something too big for a 9-year-old's heart to hold. The trial period became a masterclass in mutual devotion. Max learned to sit, mostly, to not chew shoes, except when very anxious, and that the sound of Lena's school bus meant unbridled joy was not only allowed but required. Lena, in turn, learned to interpret each subtle shift in Max's body language, the way his ears pivoted toward the door 30 seconds before anyone knocked, how his tail moved in distinct patterns for hungry versus need to go out. On the morning of the 7th day, Lena came downstairs to find her father crouched in the foyer, one large hand extended toward Max. The puppy approached with cautious dignity, his tail at half-mast, stopping just out of reach. For a long moment, man and dog simply studied each other. Then Lena's father did something remarkable. He lowered himself fully to the floor, sitting cross-legged in his work clothes, and patted his knee. "Come here, buddy." Max hesitated only a second before climbing into the offered lap, his entire back end wiggling with restrained excitement. When large, work-roughened fingers found that perfect spot behind his ears, Max's eyes slid shut in canine ecstasy. Over his head, Lena's father met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. No paperwork was signed. No grand announcements made. But in that quiet kitchen at 7:13 on a Tuesday morning, with Max's contented sighs filling the space between them, the trial became permanent. That night, for the first time since his rescue, Max slept without nightmares. And if Lena's father happened to accidentally leave the door to his bedroom slightly ajar, well, that was between him and the German Shepherd puppy now snoring at the foot of his daughter's bed. Somewhere in the backyard, beneath the old oak tree where a rope still dangled from its lowest branch, a single firefly blinked its approval before drifting off toward the stars. The oak tree still stood in the field, its bark thicker now, its roots deeper. Time had weathered it, just as it had weathered the German Shepherd who once lay trembling beneath its branches. Max no longer trembled. Every school day at precisely 3:05 p.m., he would rise from his spot on the front porch, his once golden muzzle now frosted with gray. His hips protested more these days, the old injury from his youth, where the rope had yanked too hard, aching in the cold. But routine was sacred. By 3:10, he was stationed at the bus stop, his tail sweeping the ground in slow, rhythmic arcs. The neighborhood kids knew him. Some patted his head as they passed, others tossed him treats they'd saved from lunch. Max accepted them with gentle dignity, though he never took his eyes off the bus's approach. And then, there, the squeal of brakes, the hiss of doors. And suddenly, the world narrowed to one person. Lena, 16 now, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her laughter ringing out before her feet even hit the pavement. Max's body erupted into motion, his tail a frantic metronome, his hips wiggling so hard his front paws lifted off the ground. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. His entire being vibrated with the force of his joy. "You're back, you're back, you're back." Lena dropped to her knees, uncaring of the dirt or the watching eyes, and buried her face in his fur. Max's tongue swiped her cheek, his nose pressing into her collarbone, inhaling deeply as if to memorize her scent all over again. "Missed you too, buddy," she laughed, her voice muffled against his neck. Then came the ritual. Lena would shrug off her backpack, and Max, ever the gentleman, would carefully take the strap in his teeth, trotting beside her with his head held high. The walk home was slow now. His pace had gentled with age, but it was theirs. Rain or shine, snow or heat, they took the same path, past the same houses, beneath the same trees that had watched them for years. At home, Max assumed his duties with solemn pride. Homework time? He sprawled across her math book, his chin resting on unsolved equations, as if to say, "These numbers can't hurt you while I'm here." Bad day? He'd nudge her hand until she buried her fingers in his fur, his steady breathing syncing with hers, until the storm inside her stilled. Nightmares? He was there before she even woke, his weight a grounding pressure against her legs, his muzzle resting on her chest as if to remind her, "Breathe. Just breathe." And then, the morning came when his hips wouldn't cooperate. Lena knew before she opened her eyes. The bed felt too light, the room too quiet. She found him on the rug beside her bed, his front legs splayed, his hindquarters refusing to lift. His tail thumped when he saw her, but his eyes, oh, his eyes held an apology. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice thick. She helped him stand, her arms trembling under his weight, his muscles quivering with the effort. They made it to the porch, but no further. Max's breath came in shallow pants, his body sagging against hers. The bus came and went. Lena stayed beside him, her fingers tracing the white streaks on his face, the scars around his neck, faded but never gone. Max rested his head in her lap, his ears twitching at the distant laughter of children. That afternoon, when the bus returned, the other kids paused. They didn't ask. They just looked at Max, at the way Lena's hand never left his back, and walked a little quieter past the house. That night Lena didn't do homework. She pulled an old shoebox from her closet, the same one Max had slept in years ago, and filled it with memories. A frayed piece of rope, kept all these years, though she'd never admit why. A photo of him mid-wiggle at the bus stop. His first collar, the name tag still dangling from it. Max watched her, his tail tapping the floor in weak but steady beats. When she finally lay beside him on the rug, her face pressed to his side, he sighed, a deep, contented sound, and licked her hair once. "It's okay," that lick said. "We had 1,000 mornings." That was the promise. Outside, the oak tree stood silent, its branches stretching toward the stars. And if you listened very closely, you might have heard it. The faintest echo of a tail, still wagging against the earth. Always wagging. The vet's table was cold. Lena felt it through the thin blanket they'd laid down, the chill seeping into her palms as she cradled Max's face. His muzzle had gone nearly white, his whiskers coarse with age, but his eyes, God, his eyes, were the same as they'd been beneath that oak tree all those years ago. Bright, knowing, full of quiet love. The room smelled of antiseptic and the peanut butter treats the vet tech had given him. His favorite, though he'd only licked at them today. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too clinical for a moment this sacred. "Remember the tree?" Lena whispered, her voice breaking as her thumb traced the old rope scar around his neck. The skin there had long since healed, but the ridge remained, a permanent reminder of how they'd begun. "You waited for me your whole life." Max's chest rose in a shallow breath, his tail giving the faintest thump against the table. His body was tired, so tired. But at the sound of her voice, he mustered the strength to lift his head. His nose, dry and warm, nudged her cheek. Then, with deliberate care, his tongue swiped the tear trailing her chin. and you never made me wait again." Lena choked on a sob, pressing her forehead to his. She could feel his heartbeat where their bodies touched, steady but slowing, like a pendulum winding down. Dr. Bennett moved quietly beside them, her voice soft. "Whenever you're ready." Lena wasn't ready. She would never be ready. But this wasn't about her. She nodded. The syringe clicked. Max didn't flinch when the needle went in. He only sighed, his body sagging deeper into Lena's arms as the medication spread through his veins. His breathing slowed, his muscles relaxing for the first time in months. No more pain, no more struggling to stand, no more confusion when his legs wouldn't obey. Lena held him through it all, through the shudder, through the sigh, through the moment his weight shifted from warm, living dog to something else entirely. "Good boy," she whispered into his fur, her tears soaking into the scruff of his neck. "Such a good boy." His last breath left him in a quiet huff against her collarbone, warm and familiar. Then, silence. But not emptiness. Because even as the vet listened for a heartbeat that wouldn't come, Lena felt it. The weight in her arms hadn't disappeared. It had just changed. The room blurred. Someone, her father, placed a hand on her shoulder. The vet murmured something about taking all the time she needed. But Lena heard none of it. All she heard was memory. The jingle of Max's collar as he raced to greet her at the bus stop. The solid thump of his tail against the floor when she walked into a room. The way he'd snore, loud and unapologetic, sprawled across her feet on winter nights. Slowly, carefully, she folded the blanket around him, tucking the edges beneath his body like she was putting him to bed one last time. His fur was still soft beneath her fingers, his ears still velvety when she stroked them. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. Him? The universe? The cruel twist of fate that had tied him to a tree but led her to him anyway? Outside, the world continued. Cars passed, birds sang. Somewhere a child laughed. Life moved on. But here, in this quiet room, time stood still as Lena said goodbye. She didn't know how long she stayed there, holding him. Long enough for the light through the window to shift. Long enough for her tears to dry in salty tracks on her cheeks. Long enough to memorize the weight of him in her arms one final time. When she finally stood, her legs shaky beneath her, she pressed one last kiss between his ears. "Wait for me," she murmured. Then, with a watery smile, "But not too long, okay?" The drive home passed in a haze. The house felt different when she stepped inside. Not empty exactly, but waiting. Waiting for the scratch of claws on hardwood. Waiting for the familiar jingle of a dog tag. Waiting for a presence that wouldn't come. Lena moved through the rooms like a ghost. She paused at Max's favorite napping spot in the sun, the indentation in the rug still visible. She touched his water bowl, the metal cool beneath her fingertips. She picked up his favorite toy, a mangled stuffed squirrel missing one eye, and pressed it to her chest. That night, she dreamed of fireflies. Hundreds of them, flickering in the darkness beneath the old oak tree. And there, just beyond the light, the silhouette of a German shepherd, his tail wagging slowly. Waiting, but not alone. Because beside him stood a little girl with grass-stained knees and a smile that could light up the world. And when Lena woke, her cheeks were wet, but her heart was full.